Hey, it's Chuck Dixon here to answer your questions and share some of my knowledge gleaned from going on 35 years as a professional comic book writer. Yeah, no one's more surprised than me. Our first question is from Rich Holzhauser. As a fan of the Team 7 Kindred and Deathblow books, can you tell us anything fun about the process with those books? Um, yeah, I really only worked on Team Seven in that universe. Um, if I remember correctly, this was around about the time that the guys at Image, who were primarily known for being artists, began to realize that maybe they needed help from writers, actual comic book writers. So I got brought in on Team Seven because they wanted a sort of an origin. I don't know if it was an origin or a backstory about a lot of the different Wildstorm characters. Like Deathblow and Mad Hat and Goosefoot. I can't remember their names. It's been a while, friends. Grifter, that was another one. He was cool. So anyway, they wanted a backstory, that would heavily rely on their military careers before they became superheroes. And so my understanding is that Jim Lee thought that I would be the proper writer. I heard this through one of his people, and Jim considered me to be the Tom Clancy of comic book writers, which I know he meant as a compliment, so I took it that way. And so, I kind of had to immerse myself in this universe. But up to that point, um, the Wildcat characters and I guess this was the Wildstorm universe. Um, they hadn't really been approached by actual writers. So um, there was a lot of guesswork as to personalities and things like that. And I did my best to establish various voices for them. But mostly I just came up with the most outrageous situations I could think of because because it was run by artists, it was such a visually driven comic company, and I figured, well, the fans are drawn to this imagery, this wild and crazy imagery these guys are presenting. So let's make a story um, that brings emotional content to those images, but still brings them all the nutty eye candy that apparently Image fans were fans of. So that was my job, to come up with a cohesive plot line, to have all this stuff make sense, and come up with one big outrageous action scene after another. And I had a lot of help from Aaron Wiesenfeld, the artist on the miniseries, and subsequent miniseries. The artists were a big help. Chris Warner on the second one did some awesome stuff. Um, so yeah, that was my involvement. And I was in and out with Wildstorm on a project every now and then, but I was never one of the mainstays. But they would turn to me when they needed help with certain things. Yeah. Later on, I ended up doing a Team Zero, a World War II version of Team Seven with Doug Mankey. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, I guess in the end, I've done a lot of this work. Um, but it was nothing I could make a career out of because years would go by between assignments. But it was fun, and I appreciated them thinking of me. I always appreciate it when people think of me um, for a project. Obviously, I'm a freelancer. No one's thinking of me. I got no work. All right, next question. I had no idea on this last name. John Sehon? Boy, correct me if I'm wrong. Can you talk about Seven Block? Well, it's another question with a seven in it. Did you approach Epic or were you asked to pitch something to them? Was that story more personal to you than your more mainstream comic work? Um, Seven Block was a one shot, what we used to call a prestige book by me and Jorge Zafino. And what I wanted to do was really use Jorge's tremendous command of light and dark, light and shadow, and characterizations. his characters were always different from each other and unique, but seemed like real people. Oh, not this guy. And then I really want to do a slow burn horror story, a horror story that starts out in a seemingly normal environment, and then the horror elements are introduced as we go along. So you basically get wrapped up in the two lead characters' lives, and that they appear to be the story, and then the horror elements are introduced, and the characters react to them. And damn if I wasn't right. Jorge just ate this one up with a spoon. He really got it. And you know, for two guys who didn't speak each other's languages, we were so often on the same page about everything. But look at this stuff. Look how he plays with black and white, light and dark, light sources. Um, it's a horror story set in a prison, which may be already obvious to you from these panels. And it just sort of keeps ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. And it's one of the properties I have that's often looked at by Hollywood for TV or movies. But even though it was done, oh boy, I'm going to say this was done around 92. Um, every time it's shown to a producer, they always say, well, it's like X-Files. Yeah, it is like X-Files, except it was done years before X-Files. Um, so yeah, I guess it was kind of personal. It was a departure from the superhero and straight up tough guy action stuff I was doing. But I think more personally, it was something that Jorge and I really wanted to do. That we wanted to prove something. Yeah, and I think we did. Now, how it got to be published is a horror story in itself. Originally, I had pitched this, and it was greenlit by Eclipse Comics, and I wrote it, and Jorge did all of the art. He did 48 pages. I handed them in. I sent them the artwork, and they didn't like it, and they wouldn't pay for it. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get Jorge into? I mean, yeah, I wasn't getting paid, but like, okay, I'm not getting paid. Big deal. I spent maybe 2 weeks writing this, but Jorge spent like 3 months drawing it. I felt horrible. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I shared this information with my good buddy Bo, who at the time was working for Eclipse, and he couldn't quite understand why they didn't want to print it, why they didn't like it. Well, maybe I don't know. It's still a mystery to me. Something about that story they didn't like. Well, I didn't know it, but Bo, being the pal he is, he got a hold of Tom DeFalco, who was then editor-in-chief at Marvel. And Tom heard the story, and he looked at some of the Bo had Xeroxes, and I think he had either sent them to Tom or faxed them to Tom. And he told him a story about how this was this 48-page project, it was just languishing, and the creators didn't get paid, and it's awesome, and why don't we do it? And Tom agreed, and he walked down the hall to Carl Potts's office. Carl called me, said, "Hey, Tom was just in my office and dumped this envelope on my desk and said, we're publishing this and you're editing it." So that's how it ended up at Epic. And that's the kind of guy Tom DeFalco was. Just seat of the pants comic book publishing. The kind of signature publishing that comics were built on. I think Tom could have been one of those guys back in the golden age, churning this stuff out, just throwing stuff against the wall, see if it sticks. Just, hey, why don't we try this? Why not? So yeah, hats off to Bo and Tom and Carl for getting me out of a tight spot and making sure that Jorge got taken care of on the art end and the money end. All right, next question. Ian J. Miller. I've always been curious about the experience of working at CrossGen. Do you feel that being treated as an employee and working at an office was a better way of working than freelancing from home? Did this setup have any benefits or drawbacks compared to how most other companies do things. Um, yeah, CrossGen was, like I always say, CrossGen was a fantastic experience, and no one will ever do it again because it failed so spectacularly. But for those of you who don't know, we actually had a facility. We were in a industrial park, and we had a facility, and it was very nice. And uh, you know, and we had open quads, like a huge open cubicle system, and and it was divided into quads, and in each quad was the team for each book. And it was a great environment. The writers all had their own offices because writers must have a door to close, and because we're just jerks. And there were no editors, and we had a neat break room with coffee and snacks, and you know everybody was treated like princes and princesses. Our production department was right there. Our letterers were right there. The colorist right there. You could meet with your whole team. You could take your team out to lunch and talk about what you were working on, or talk about the movie you watched last night. Who knew? And it was a tremendous environment filled with people. I always told Mark Alessi, who started the company, um, that he was a very fortunate man in that he um, somehow found all the artists who knew how to meet a deadline without being prompted. Um, all these guys needed was a delivery date. What date is this going to the printer? And everybody hit their deadlines. They didn't need anybody goosing them or anything else. Everybody knew how to use a calendar. And because of the rule there was one page a day, uh, you the penciler and the inker had, a whole day. There was no pressure. There was none of this. Oh, this guy screwed up. Jump in and do the last 10 pages in 2 days. None of that. It was a perfect fit for me because, as usual, I just jumped right in and you know got way, way, way ahead of schedule. Um, but it you know it was a different kind of environment, but it was bound to fail because we were in a down market following 9/11. Uh, it was a bad time to be jumping in. We got no help from Diamond. Uh, every deal we made on the outside for movie and TV, we ran into like last minute problems. We were so close to getting movie deals a couple of times, and that would have saved the company. Obviously, we would have been able to bring in new investors. But overall, it was an amazing experience. I still miss my office there, and I still miss seeing all my friends there. Friends that were I was working with people that were already friends of mine, and I made a lot of new friends. And I also got to do some terrific work. Uh, Way of the Rat, El Cazador, Brath. They were all books out. They're all my kind of books. High adventure, high action. Uh, PG rated, PG 13 rated, and El Cazador. Just great stuff. Got to explore a lot of adventure genres I'd never gotten to work in before, and worked with some of the most talented people in the business. Just some amazing folks in that building. And to be able to stand there and watch a guy color a book, or watch a guy ink a book. Inking to me is amazing. Inking, I always say inkers are the Jedi masters of comics. I mean, nobody really knows how they do what they do, but they do it. Um, so there you go. I'll probably do more on CrossGen. I'm getting a lot of questions about CrossGen. I might even do a whole question and answer segment just on that company. So anyway, next question. Christopher Cooksey says, what are the biggest dialogue mistakes you see writers make? Yeah, dialogue is a bugaboo for me. I see so much bad dialogue, or non sequitur dialogue, or pointless dialogue, or useless dialogue, and the mistakes are many. The biggest one I see is redundancy. I mean, in this panel, one of the characters actually tells the other character to stop telling him what's going on. So I'd like to think this was a joke, a little inside joke from the writer. I don't get it. But I see this a lot where, uh, unnecessary captions that, you know, basically describe what you can see. You know, these interplanetary robots are obviously toasting something. We assume it's a success. Who toasts a failure? You know, and the most important thing in this panel is down there on the lower left is the little human being in that strange canister is being knocked off the table. It kind of gets lost because you're reading that caption up at the top of the panel. You know, you got to let artists do what they do. Get out of the way. Leave them alone. Stop describing stuff we can see. Hold on here. I mean, you want to make, if you're going to have dialogue in a panel, you want to make it direct to what's happening. This dialogue is direct to what's happening. There's a threat. This guy means it. You know, he's not taking any crap off these two busters he's got to drop on. So this is dialogue that makes sense. You want to stay away from dialogue that runs counter to the action, or dialogue that basically is just plain bad. Especially on dialogue, a writer has to question themselves. Every time I write a line of dialogue, unless it comes out perfect the first time, which is rare, every time I write a line of dialogue, I have the character saying what needs to be said. I ask myself, can I say this another way? Can I say this a better way? And every writer should always ask themselves that question. And all great writers, or good writers, and even mediocre writers do that. Is there a better way to say this? This dialogue is too on the nose. It's too clumsy. It's poorly phrased. It's not clever enough, or it's too clever. You know, and you've got to be thinking about a lot of things when you do dialogue. You got to be thinking of the voice of the character, the situation they're in. Is the dialogue even necessary? And does the dialogue sing? Does it sound, you know, natural to the ear? Look at this. I wish I could get rid of all my problems as easy as that. There's a whole story in one panel. And it's not on the nose, right? She's basically just, you know, this sick woman is happy this guy killed himself, but she's not saying, oh, good, he's gone, because we can see he's gone, you know, or, you know, I'm whatever, you know, now I'm free to buy that car I wanted. No, she just says that, you know, I wish I could get rid of all my problems as easy as that, which, you know, also lets you know a lot about her, that beyond the fact that she's a sociopath, is that, you know, she likes things to go easy. She likes things to go her way. A bit narcissistic, this lady. So, yeah, and you want to avoid this. If you got a panel like this where two characters are explaining things to each other, it's dead. It's dead. You've made a mistake. You must go back through your whole story and figure out a way to pace it and lay it out so you've avoided this kind of panel. I mean, readers just, especially, this panel appears near the end of the story. It's Batman explaining how everything worked that you saw before. And he's basically calling the reader a dummy because you didn't notice any of this stuff. Well, you didn't notice any of this stuff because the art didn't emphasize it. You know, it's a cheat. It's, you know, it ain't right. So you want to avoid these panels with like tons and tons and tons of blah, 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 blah. Because most of the time the reader's just going to skip it to go on to the action anyway. So why bother writing it? Come up with a better way to do it. Rethink your story so it can be told more visually. So you don't need panels like this that just run on and on and on. I mean, look at this. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in their prime. Boom. It just simply doesn't get better than this. And think about humor. You know, even if it's like The Punisher, where the Punisher says things that are funny, he doesn't mean to be funny, but they are funny in juxtaposition, or just, you know, straight up laughs. Think about the reader who's reading this earnestly for a serious story, and think about the reader who's reading it sort of casually for a goof. And you can entertain both and serve both without, you know, denigrating the other, leaving the other behind. But, you know, in standard mainstream comic book stories, it always pays to not get so serious. And I'm not a big fan of going dark, dark, dark on all this stuff, especially guys running around in their underwear and capes. Doesn't make any sense to me. It seems kind of weird. So yeah, don't leave the humor behind. I'll probably do more stuff on dialogue. I'm sure I'll get more specific questions as we go along. But those are my tips. That's what I do. You know, I'm not telling other writers what to do. I'm just telling you what I do and what I've learned from other writers. Okay, Andrew Runyon. Do you have a vision for what your run on Fantastic Four would look like? Well, it would look a lot like this because I'd really like to do it with Graham Nolan. Beyond that, I would just return to the kind of science problems that Fantastic Four used to have. You know, they would run into basically a high science fiction concept that was creating an existential threat to the planet Earth or to people that they know and loved. And the Fantastic Four would use their various powers and the might of Reed Richards' amazing intellect to get them out of it. And that's what I would do. It's as simple as that. I wouldn't break the formula. And I wouldn't, as other writers always say, explore their nature as a family. But, you know, obviously they're a family. You know, that doesn't really need to be explored. And if you can't explore that while telling kick-ass stories, yeah, you should be writing something else. KB Chuck Hines says, do you know where I left my car keys? Now, Chuck, you know the doctor said you can't drive anymore. You're not fooling me. Okay. Matt Coleman. Chuck, what's the best way to measure pacing and storytelling? Okay. In comic storytelling, it's action. Action, action, action. If you don't have action, movement, something the hell going on the pages to draw the reader forward, to draw the reader's eye down the page, to draw them to the next page, you've failed. You, even if you have the characters talking to each other, have them doing something while they're talking. I don't care if there's Dave Michelinie, when he wrote Unknown Soldier, he came up with this awesome gag. I love this gag. At the beginning of each Unknown Soldier story, it was like Mission Impossible. You know, there was a formula to it, not established by Dave. Dave was picking up on it, where the Unknown Soldier would get his orders. You know, the mission would be told to him. And Dave had this gimmick where the officer who was in charge of the Unknown Soldier would have puzzles on his desk. These little puzzles, you know, like 1940s versions of a Rubik's cube. And while Unknown Soldier was getting his orders, he would be solving the puzzle. And in the final panel of the page, he would drop the completed puzzle on the officer's desk. And it was a cool gag because it was like, boy, Unknown Soldier is so slick that he took in all these details, even while, you know, the other side of his brain was working out this problem. And the added benefit of the look of frustration on the officer's face because this was a puzzle he couldn't solve, even though he, you know, could concentrate on it 100%. Just a cool gag. And even though it was a quiet moment, it's a lot better than just a guy talking and a guy listening. You know, 6 panels of that, it's dead. It's dead. It's useless. The other thing about pacing is be aware of little things like panel size. Look at this little quartet by Harvey Kurtzman. You know, you don't have control of time when you write a comic book story because you don't know at what pace the reader is going to read it. So a lot of times you can create the illusion of time, and you need time for suspense. The illusion of time by the simple gimmick of making the panels all the same size. If you've read Watchmen, most of those pages are 9-panel grids. Alan Moore is very, very much creating time. He's creating suspense. He's setting the pace for the story by the size of the panel. He didn't draw the panels, but you know, obviously he and Dave Gibbons came up with this format together, and he's controlling time in much the same way that Harvey does it here. I mean, obviously these 4 panels take place in, you know, inside of what, a second and a half, and your eye is drawn from one to the other. And then he ends the page on a panel that you've got to see what happens next. You got to see, you know, did he save his buddy or not? Pretty amazing stuff, isn't it? And simple. Simple. This is comics. It's a sublime medium. It's a sophisticated medium, far more sophisticated than a lot of people give it credit for. And if you're going to write in it, you've got to recognize that. You've got to embrace that. You got to love it. Another thing is letting your artist tell the story. Here we have bottom two panels of a Toth story, which Black Canary has been kidnapped by a bunch of feminists, if I remember right. Radical feminists, I should say. And here, the writer decides to leave that last panel to Toth. And why not? I mean, what dialogue could you possibly put there that would make this more ominous, that would put more in doubt the Black Canary's fate than this van on pulling into this creepy alley, obviously in a bad part of town. Nothing good is going to happen here. And there's no word balloon you could write that would improve that panel. So let your artist tell the story, because that's what comics are. They're a visual medium. Your job as a writer is important, but just as important is staying out of the way. I said before, movement. Here's the great John Stanley. He's got information to impart here to set his story up. But look, each panel moves. Each panel is in a slightly different locale, and things are happening, and emotions are happening, and crazy stuff's happening. Mr. Moppet's getting a turkey for some reason, and not happy with the price. So a lot is being imparted here, and Stanley was a master at rising action, at keeping things moving and making them move at more and more of a frenetic pace. And if you read a John Stanley story, as you go through the story, there's less and less dialogue generally toward the end, because now you know the situation. Now everything's been set up. Now you can just enjoy looking at the pictures, because they're going to tell you the vast majority of the story. Again, this is one of the most famous, grid pages in history. Spider-Man trapped under a, massive piece of machinery, and if he doesn't get out from under it, Aunt May will die. I don't remember all the circumstances, but I do remember the emotion, and you see it here. You see it here. Stan gets out of the way here. Stan didn't always get out of the way, but he gives Spidey just enough dialogue to get it across, and these panels probably would not have worked as well silently, because as much as Ditko does get the emotion across as best he can with a character whose face is entirely covered. I mean, look at that third panel. I mean, that is defeat. He needs help from Stan to get across the full emotional content, and that's something you can't get in the way of. You got to be thinking of the emotional through line of your story, or it doesn't make a lot of sense. So action, pacing, balancing dialogue with pictures, getting out of your artist's way. These are all things that you need to think about. And the more stories you write in comics, the better you're going to get at it if you pay attention to these principles. If you look at the work of the people that came before you, you study it and try to figure out, why does this work? Why do I care so much if Spider-Man gets that machine off him? Why am I so satisfied that these islanders have finally gotten tired of the man who's been oppressing them all these years? So think about all those things. And as I said, I don't tell other writers what to do. I just tell you what I do. But those are my words of advice and caution and whatever. So I do a time travel series called Bad Times. It's about a bunch of former U.S. Army Rangers get involved with an experiment to travel back in time. They do that, and they get in all kinds of trouble. And there's 6 books in the series. They kind of all tell one huge, gigantic time travel saga They go to ancient Judea and fight a Roman legion. This is with modern weapons. That's kind of the gimmick here. They go to China in the 1800s to fight in a rebellion. And yes, there will be dinosaurs. You stick with this series long enough, you're going to get all the dinosaurs you can possibly hope to see in a time travel story. So they're a lot of fun to write, even the research stuff that I've got to do to make them at least somewhat believable. And I've been told that even though the science of time travel that I come up with is complete and utter gobbledygook, I've been told by physicists that it's somewhat believable. it's somewhat workable. It's not entirely ridiculous. So I'm pleased about that because science was never my best subject in school. Anyway, if you want to check it out, it's available in this big fat omnibus and also individual editions on Kindle at as they used to say, popular prices. Anyway, that's it for me for right now. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming, and I'll keep the answers coming, and I will see you down the road.